Okay, so very welcome everyone to today's UX Bytes webinar. Today we're going to talk about the topic which sort of revolves around temporary design trends to timeless design principles. And what we mean by that is, how in the whole time the web's been with us, since 1989, whilst lots and lots has changed, which Gareth will go through in terms of the evolution of the web. There are a number of design principles and a number of key things that enables companies to win online that stand the test of time, regardless of some of these temporary design trends and principles that we see crop up throughout our lifetime. Just by way of introductions then, before getting into the content. So I'm Andrew, I'm our head of delivery at Fathom. And I'm going to just be introducing today's webinar as I'm doing at the minute, and then facilitating some of the Q&A towards the end, and hopefully giving you a little bit more information as well in terms of how you can keep connected to us both today and further into the future. And Gareth is going to be facilitating the session. He'll introduce himself in a second. You can keep in touch with us throughout today and throughout the webinar in a couple of different ways. You can use the UX Bytes hashtag on your Twitter feed, and also if you want to, please mention us as well in your tweets at Fathom UX, and that's how you can keep connected and share your nuggets or share your feelings about the webinar today. In terms of the agenda then, so after the intro, Gareth's going to take over here, and we're going to break the agenda up into essentially the evolution of the web and how, as the web has matured and how users have matured and their expectations of the web, how design and how the web has evolved in regard to those user needs. And then we're going to finish with about 15 minutes to go, hopefully after 30 minutes of content, with some good question and answers that I'll aim to facilitate and then pick up as many as possible. If we can't get through every question, we'll aim to get through them all in our blog follow-up, which we do pretty promptly, along with a recording of the UX Bytes webinar as well, shared with you all. So I'll hand over to Gareth now just to run us through the main bulk of the content, and I'll check in with you all again come the time of Q&A.
Lovely, Andrew. Thanks very much for teeing that up, and thank you for kindly handing over to me. So yes, as Andrew has said, I'm Gareth and I'm CEO at Fathom, and I'm going to be leading our session today in terms of the content that we're looking for. I suppose there are a number of things that have prompted me to tackle this subject on today's webinar, the theme of trends versus principles. And I suppose one of the big things that has prompted me to do it is that the web is about 10,000 days old, just at the minute. The thing about the web is that, like many inventions, it didn't have a kind of a day that it started. So it's impossible to say, the day that it was actually invented in the form that we understand it now. But when we look at about the time that the web started to become mainstream and started to move out of academia and move into the world of commercial, it is about 10,000 days ago. And so I think what I'm interested in exploring is simply this: are there things that we have observed, or are there things that we have learned about the last 10,000 days that can give us clues or help us understand what the future of the next 10,000 days might be? I think what I'm most interested in is I'm interested in the characteristics of the digital winners, organizations who have succeeded in the new experience-driven economy, in our new digital world. What is it that they have got right? How do they think? What do they talk about? How do they make decisions? What matters to them? What do they value? Those are the kind of things that I'm kind of wanting to explore and tease out as we think about it. And I think that the question is non-trivial. And I actually think that it's a question that the digital community has been slow to address. And this puts us at variance with other design and with other innovation sectors. Let's look, for instance, at the world of architecture. The world of architecture has gone through some very clear trends over the years, and you can see on the screen now what Byzantine architecture looks like, what Gothic looks like, what Art Nouveau looks like. Now, moving into the current day, we know what modernist, postmodern, and neo-modern styles look like. So my father's a retired architect, and And he, just by looking at a house, for instance, just a regular domestic house, he could look at a house and he could tell you if it was built in the 1960s, in the 1980s, in the 1970s, because there are design trends that were popular in amongst that time. So in the world of architecture, you can date buildings based on how they look, because they will look according to the trends of that day. However, architects and architecture as a discipline is very confident when it comes to their principles. In other words, there are principles which architects will not compromise. They will not back down on. So they've got these trends which represent the fashions of the day, but they've got these principles that they simply won't compromise on. So for instance, one of the first things that an architect will do when they're designing a building is they will explore the relationship that the building has with its surrounding environment. So they're very aware that a building sits within a context, and they won't compromise that when they're making design decisions. They recognize that that is an immutable principle. Similarly, when architects are designing buildings, they're really interested to explore the building's relationship with light. And again, if I can go back to my father, anytime he was looking at a building or designing a building, one of the first things that he did was to walk to a window and try and work out where the sun would rise and set. He always interested in the relationship with light. Another example of something which an architect will do is they will explore the main uses of the building. You know, who needs to use it? What do they need to use it for? What purpose does it serve? What will most people do? So again, architects are very good at exploring the relationship between form and function. So when we look at design principles, or we look at design practices in other areas, what we see is that I think they're ahead of the curve versus digital when it comes to understanding the relationship between trends and principles. So let's begin to think about what this looks like in the world of web and in the world of digital design. And one of the places that I always like to look is at what is the most popular, over the 25 years, over the 10,000 days, the most popular news website in the UK has been the BBC website. And if we look at the evolution of the BBC website from 1999 to 2022, it starts to give us some clues over that period of time about how it has evolved. So you will see on the left-hand side, it started quite noisy. There was navigation down the left. You'll see then as it moves across, there was no global navigation. It was very newsy. Then we see the introduction of a global navigation. We see that the screen is quite short in terms of its screen depth. But as we then move into the tens, 2013, 2017, what we see is that the site becomes simpler, longer, more visual, and more driven by content. And so if we look at that as a general theme, what we can see is that even though the site has survived the 25 years and trends have come and gone, we can clearly see an arc, we can see a design arc as this website has evolved to meet the needs that users have expressed over that period of time. And that's the bit I'm interested in. I'm interested in the evolution of design over that period in response to the need to be a commercial winner and in response to what we know to be user expectations and demands. So to kind of set the scene, let me just give a really quick whistle-stop tour of how we have ended up with today's internet. And I'm just going to go through the evolution of the web very quickly. So let's kick off with web 0.0. I call it 0.0 because this is the pre-commercial web. This is the academic web. This is the web as it built on top of the internet, which had been around since the late 1960s. As Tim Berners-Lee and so on started to build a protocol which allowed us to not only access the information on the internet, which was always available, but also to navigate the information on the internet. So, Berners-Lee has brought so much to the world, and I don't want to diminish it by oversimplifying it, but at the heart of what he did was he gave us a means of navigating and searching content. He gave us a mechanism which wrapped up not just what content said, but where content belonged. And he developed HTML. He gave us that markup language, which was the foundation for navigation and the foundation for search. And in fact, what we can see here on the screen on the right is we can see one of the very first web pages. So Berners-Lee's developing this in an academic context, and like so many innovations, as it begins to emerge from academia and come into the mainstream, it is beset by an immature technology stack. And for those of you of a certain vintage, and certainly I'm of that certain vintage, you will know what it was like to access the internet with a painfully slow modem, with really poor browsers, with antiquated hardware by today's standards, and somehow it managed to emerge from that academic cocoon. However, not everybody believed. If we have a look at one of the most famous quotes from Paul Krugman, so like Paul Krugman is he's no hack. He's not some journalist looking for cheap clickbait. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He said in the late 90s, by 2005, it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machine. And I'm sure Krugman has regretted that quote ever since. But other organizations such as Newsweek, again, were big cynics that the internet would ever come to anything or do anything. We're promised instant catalog shopping, just point and click for great deals. We'll order airline tickets over the network. Even if there's a trustworthy way to send money over the internet, which there isn't, the network is missing a most essential ingredient of capitalism, which is salespeople. And it's interesting for me because what Newsweek didn't know, and I'm not pretending that I knew at that time either, what they didn't know was the power of self-service, the commercial impact of empowering the person you want to do business with is so overwhelming that when you give them efficiency and you give them convenience and you give them speed and you give them a sense of confidence in the process, they don't need salespeople. If I can do this myself and I can do it quicker and I can do it more conveniently, then I will. So the web stumbled its way out of Web 0.0 and we moved into what we might call Web 1.0. And again, the dates aren't exact, but they're just to give you a flavor of the first decade from about 94 to 04. The web was predominantly a one-way medium. And there's no point pretending. It really was a bit of a Wild West. I've made my living from the web since the mid-90s. So I was there. I was in the Wild West. I'm not sure if I was a cowboy or an Indian or if I was selling gold or heading west. I don't know where I fit into the analogy. But the industry, recognizing the opportunity, was just fumbling to begin to try and make some sense of what was going on. And what we see in the early websites was an organization, was an industry just not sure what to do with this new medium. And I think for me, a lovely example, if we take just an Irish example, this is the Aer Lingus website from the mid to late 1990s. And if you look at it, it's got nothing to do with the customer, and it's got everything to do with the airline. You look at that page and it kind of says, we're Aer Lingus, and we've got planes and pilots and cabin crew. And not only that, we are Ireland's national airline. So in the absence of knowing what to do with this, with Newsweek ringing in the rear that you need a salesperson, the idea that you would put the user in charge of what's going on the website was new. But if we fast forward to the end of that decade, Aer Lingus and loads of others had begun to recognize that the power of the web, the opportunity that comes with the internet, is in its ability to hand power to users. So the 1995 Aer Lingus website was all about Aer Lingus. The 2003 Aer Lingus website was all about the user. What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to fly? How can we help you? That had turned on its head to reflect the fact that what was beginning to emerge was organizations were recognizing that actually you got this digital thing right if you made it about the customer and you didn't make it about you. But like the Wild West, there was also a gold rush. There was a huge groundswell of innovative and entrepreneurial activity around that time. And some organizations made the cut and have built successful businesses that are with us to today. But many, many organizations, a huge number, crashed and burned. And again, for those of you who were around, you will know that there was a huge dot-com crash in the early 2000s as this new false dawn, false economy hadn't quite worked itself out yet. I think the poster child for that period was boo.com. They burned through 8 digits of venture capital money. They were a high-end fashion retailer. The website ran on a technology called Flash. To buy stuff from them, you needed the latest technology, you needed the latest browser, you needed good hardware, you needed Flash plugins. And guess what? People just didn't want that stuff at that time with that degree of inconvenience. So there were a lot of, like, if I can use the sort of language of UX, there were a lot of business hypotheses around that time which had a go, but because they didn't fully recognize the dynamics of the marketplace, they didn't recognize what was going on in front of them, we had mistakes like boo.com. And I say that without judgment. I won't criticize someone who sees a market changing and has a go. But if we have a look at some of those who have succeeded, some of those who have made it, and again, you can see the early Amazon logo as it's moved through to the one we'll be more familiar with today. We can see the Google logo as it has evolved to the one that we're more familiar with today. And so what interests me is that even in the middle of the chaos, even in the middle of the Wild West and all of these things changing, there was something about how some organizations went about their business which allowed them to win. Amazon wasn't perfect from day one, but there was something about how they saw their job that has allowed them 25 years later to be the most successful e-commerce platform in the history of the internet. Google weren't perfect from day one, but there was something about how they went building their algorithms and understanding their product that has allowed them to be in that sort of that top echelon of product companies in 2022. So this was it was a Wild West. The organizations who were active on the internet were trying to work out what it was all about. And in amongst all of the noise, in amongst all of the entrepreneurial activity, there were just little shoots or little green shoots of organizations who were beginning to get things right that are important when we come to think about the relationship between trends and principles. So as 2004 came around and technology evolved and more people got online, really from 2004 to the present day, Web 2.0 was upon us. And the big shift in Web 2.0 is that the web moved from being a one-way medium where we went on to consume, and it became a much more fluent two-way medium where we went on to both to consume content and to contribute to the conversation. Now, the technologies were always there. Again, for those of you of a certain age, email newsletters and email communications used to be managed with a technology called listserv. There were discussion forums. There was actually a news group protocol. So the building blocks, if you like, of the read-write web were always there, but they just weren't usable enough. They weren't packaged enough to make them available to anyone other than the really keen hobbyist. So around 2003, 2004, there was this explosion of technologies and platforms which really began to represent the internet, not just as a place where you went to receive a monologue, but a place where you went to become part of a dialogue. And so if we think about some of the evolutions that happened around that time, we've got a whole series of technologies and we've a whole series of platforms which might come to represent Web 1.0. But as we look at Web 2.0, what we see is that there's a real move towards the internet almost self-policing. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you look at Flickr, which is one of the early photograph sharing websites, the way Flickr was set up was, it wasn't the leadership in Flickr who decided how photographs were going to be tagged or categorized or managed. It was the community of Flickr who decided that. We saw mp3.com, where you went to buy your mp3s. We saw that replaced with the file sharing network Napster. And actually from Napster then came a whole series of new opportunity for the likes of everything from Apple Music to Spotify. We saw the rigor of Britannica Online replaced with the democracy of Wikipedia. We saw screen scraping, which was how organizations used to get content off other websites. We saw that replaced with web services, where website owners would build technical interfaces to allow other people to get access to their data and their services, because they recognized that helped their data and their services spread. So there was this great kind of democratization of content. And around that time, I suppose, lots of the early Web 2.0 platforms were built. In other words, the pioneers on top of which the Facebooks and the Twitters and the Snapchats and the Instagrams, the early pioneers who did the heavy lifting to get the market ready, they were all born around that 2003, 2004 period. And the way that I look at those organizations is I call them, or I view them as leaderless. Not that they didn't have leaders, but rather that the power, the value of Flickr or Bebo or TripAdvisor didn't lie in their technology, and it didn't lie in their management team. It lay in their community. And so even if we look today, TripAdvisor is hugely valuable because that's where the community goes to understand what restaurants and hotels and travel experiences are like. Bebo was much less valuable because the technology is unchanged, it's still there, but the community has moved on. And so you'll see here, I've used the Apache Indians and Alcoholics Anonymous as well. I use them because they are real world examples of other organizations which are also leaderless and that are more of a movement or a community than they are a command and control area. So this was some of the pioneering that was happening around 03, 04. And it's almost definitely impossible to believe through the eyes of 2022. But again, I've got loads of press clippings from the time, and I've got loads of my own memories for the time. And it's hard to believe, but it was a time of huge optimism. These are in the days before fake news. These are in the days before misinformation. These are in the days before there's, Cambridge Analytica or the big social, democracy challenges of today that we're facing. There was a real sense of optimism that the national conversation was going to become democratized. It's kind of like this idea that anybody can write a blog, anybody can write a book now, but the downside is that most books that people write are terrible, and publishing houses save us all from having to read the worst of them. So there's this tension that we can see so much more clearly now, but at the time it was a time of huge optimism. And then the final thing that happened around 2.0 is that, of course, the web went mobile. The internet, which for its first 10 or 15 years was sitting on people's desks, connected by hard wires, was now mobile. It was in our pockets. It was in laptops. It was in different devices. So that's a super whistle-stop tour of what happened around Web 2.0. And whilst Web 3.0 is evolving all the time, and I'm not going to talk about NFTs, and I'm not going to talk about that element of Web 3.0. I want to talk a little bit about the more positive elements of Web 3.0, which I would call the quest for meaning, which is terribly unnecessarily philosophical. But let me explain what I mean. Here's what I mean by the quest for meaning. Let's say you're wanting to stay in a hotel overnight in London, and you type in best hotel London. Are you wanting to find the best hotel in London, or are you wanting to find a hotel with the word best in its title? Well, Web 3.0 and me says you're looking for the best hotel in London. So what Web 3.0 is trying to do is trying to use contextual information to add meaning to your behavior, and I'll state this positively, to try and give you the best experience that you can get. So, what Google's trying to do is if you type in best hotel London and you're looking to stay overnight on a Wednesday night, it will determine that you might be a traveler, a business person wanting to stay over for business. If you search best hotel at the weekend, even though you're the same person, it may think that you're wanting a romantic break with your partner, you're wanting to go with your family or whatever. So Web 3.0 tries to align and ascertain meaning to words such as best. What that means is if you search on Google for bare naked ladies, you better hope that the context you have given Google means that they will return you some albums by the band, as opposed to anything else that you might get when you type that in. But there's other stuff as well. You can ask Google questions. You can ask Google, what's the name of that movie where those two guys drink wine? And Google knows that the answer is that it's called Sideways, and it gives you that response. But we also see geographical context as well. So if you happen to be in this garden, which is St George's Market in Camden, and you search for London Tube Station, then it doesn't send you, Google doesn't send you to the generic Transport for London homepage. It sends you to the directions and the content of the physically nearest tube station that you're there. So it's trying to ascertain meaning and connection through the contextual information that it provides you with. So in the middle of all this change, 25 years in, and we think about how even Web 3 is now evolving. I mentioned NFTs. We've got cryptocurrency knocking around in the mix there as well. There's been enormous change. And as I say, I think the thing which interests me the most is to ask the question, What have we learned at a macro level? What do we see that we can deem to be true that can help us make good digital decisions as we look into the future? Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin to think about the relationship between the facts, in other words, what happens in the real world, and the beliefs, in other words, the value system and the belief system that exists inside the organizations who are winning. In other words, to what extent do our winning organizations understand the world as it really is? I think there are three major themes that underpin the web in its first 10,000 days, and these are critically important, and they change everything about how we make decisions. Here are the three things that I think have been constant throughout the 10,000 days of the internet. The first thing is utility. People use the internet with an incredible focus on utility. Regularly, organizations build technology for purpose A, but users use it for purpose B. Organizations that fail underestimate just how ruthless, how impatient, how demanding the online user is. They underestimate how easily they can go to the competition. They underestimate how smart the user is. So there's a real sense of utility. Digital winners really help us get stuff done. They really help users solve problems. The second thing is power. Organizations who win recognize that the internet has shifted the balance of power from the organization to the user. Organizations used to be able to cover up a second-rate service with first-rate marketing. They simply can't do that now. The truth about what your actual service is like is just too easy to find online for you to try and swim against the tide. And there are legion examples of organizations trying to quell or silence or lower the volume on dissenting users and just making things worse. So digital winners recognize and empower the users who they want to serve. And the final thing then that they get right is they really understand user priorities. One of the hardest things to take is that whilst it's not a universal rule, it's almost universal. When people are using your digital products, they would almost definitely be doing something else. So when they're finding the directions to a map, or they're finding a bus timetable, or they're downloading a ticket, or they're booking a flight, they would almost definitely be on the flight, or have reached at their destination, or have got that task done and moved on. And so the reason I start with those is because there is something about plugging yourself into the mindset of the user that you're there to serve that kind of just calibrates your decision making. And when we think about that, I think there are 5 characteristics of decision making that we observe digital winners making across those 10,000 days. And let me finish by sharing what those are. Number 1, they pursue nuance, they avoid easy cliches, and they have a natural skepticism towards advice or design decisions that haven't been proven or based on data. And this one is critical because the digital industry is full of cliche. I mean, every industry has its challenges. One of our big challenges in digital is it is coming down with cliche. Now, the difficulty with cliche generally is that there is truth in it. So if you listen to folks like, so this guy's called Luke W. He's a brilliant UX practitioner, and he'd be sort of one of the most followed UX people on YouTube and on Twitter and stuff like that. So he's constantly coming out with good stuff. But what happens is some of the stuff that he explains with precision and explains with nuance just gets summarized in a 3-letter or a 4-word headline. So you hear stuff like blogs help SEO. You hear stuff like mobile first design. You hear these sort of cliches or concepts that actually are far more complex than the headline. Some blogs help some SEO. User first feels like a much better approach to me than mobile first. And so one of the things that digital winners do is they get beyond the easy truisms and they get into the detail. Second thing is this, the digital winners really care about users, as in they really, really care. All of their decision making, all of their design decisions are baked into their users. One of the problems that we find in the world of UX is that many organizations, they want just enough UX. I need just enough UX to have that ticked off. And it reminds me of a quote by the guy who's head of design in Tesla, who used to be head of design at Mazda. He said that when he designed in Mazda, he was the link in a chain. When he designed at Tesla, he was the hub at the center of the spokes. Organizations who win plug design into the customer. Design is the interface between your technology and the people who need to use it. And organizations who win really get that and understand that. The example that I always use is Amazon. I have endless design discussions with colleagues about Amazon and the fact that, let's face it, it's not the prettiest thing you've ever seen. But here's something that simply has to be true. If Jeff Bezos thought he could sell more stuff by making Amazon prettier, you can be absolutely sure that he would make it prettier. But the culture of the organization is that design is led by user needs and not led by designer preferences. Number 3, they invest in navigation and flow. In other words, they use the thing that Tim Berners-Lee brought to the party nearly 30 years ago. They understand that the building blocks of the internet are navigation and flow. I don't have time today to go into it. I almost definitely could rant about it for the next half hour. But navigation and flow are consistently underinvested in digital products, consistently. One of the things I do, particularly pre-COVID, was traveled all over Europe and delivered UX training. And I always started off the course by asking everyone there if they had been on a website or been on an app recently which had caused them to feel angry. And usually you get most hands up, and if it's a Monday morning, you usually get all hands up. And I asked folks what it was, what was it caused you to feel angry? And people share their answers. And here's the thing, the things which they share are things like, they were looking for the bus timetable and they couldn't find it. They were trying to download the PDF. They were trying to shop online. They were wanting to get a ticket for the concert. And when I dig a bit deeper, what I uncover is that people either can't find the information that they're looking for, or they can't complete their task. In other words, the organization has underinvested in navigation to find the content, and they have underinvested in flow to complete the task. There is an obsession around navigation and flow in digital winners because they recognize that that's what, if you don't get that right, that's what disconnects you from your customer. I've asked this question to about at least 1,000 people in 15 countries. No one has ever said, I got really angry because the designer got the RGB references in the logo wrong. No one has ever said, I dislike the hero shot they put on the homepage. Never once. Now, I'm not saying we should be casual about our logos, but I am saying we need to make sure that whatever project time we invest in that hero shot versus the project time we invest in navigation and flow needs to align with what users value. Next up, they embed usability at the heart of all design processes. Those of you who will have seen previous webinars will know that the largest usability test ever undertaken in the world by the OECD tells us that when 216,000 people were tested across 33 of the world's wealthiest countries, we found only 5% were IT expert. And the difficulty is that people who design and build software are in that 5%. We have got to break out of that 5% to ensure that our software doesn't just look cool for us. It doesn't just get the accolades of awards judges or a pat in the back from our boss. We got to make sure it works for folks who aren't in the 5%. The final thing then, folks, just to wrap up, is that an immutable design trend or principle across the 10,000 days is that organizations who win invest in problem solving and in problem deconstruction. There's something powerful about this idea that a problem well stated is a problem half solved. There's something about solving problems well that connects back to users being utilitarian, to users being powerful, and to user priorities saying they want to get on with their lives and probably do something else. And the only way that we can respond to those user dynamics is to really make sure we solve their problems. Think about the apps that you put on the home screen of your mobile phone. The theorists tell us that that is the most intimate digital space that we have. And when you look at those apps, what you will see is they solve problems for you. They help you navigate and sort and manage your life. There's something about the relationship between how our technology solves problems for us and our loyalty to it, that digital winners acknowledge and represent and build into design processes. And so digital winners, when we look at the evolution of design, have a big focus in terms of that problem solving mindset. Okay, folks, so just to wrap up and to think about what those principles tell us again, here they are, just to summarize. Here are our principles. Here's what digital winners do all the time. Number one, they pursue nuance and they avoid easy cliche. Number two, they really, really care about their users. They make hard decisions every day to the benefit of their users. Number three, they invest in navigation and flow. Number four, they embed usability at the heart of the design process. And number five, they have a big cultural investment in problem solving and deconstruction. Great, folks. So thank you so much for listening. And I can see there's been a bit of movement on the chat and the QA. So I'll hand over to Andrew just to kind of keep us right for the next little section. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Gareth, for that. And yes, there's been a couple of questions, a bit of activity on the chat and Q&A. So I'll start with one that came in on the chat there, Gareth. I know it wasn't covered, and you kind of specified that we weren't going to talk about NFTs today. But Cheryl asked a question around, she's interested in how we can adapt and be prepared and take advantage of NFTs. Have you any thoughts on that in terms of how, it's such a new concept, isn't it? I'm not sure if there is an answer to that, but have you any thoughts on it?
Cheryl, I only have a personal view. I'm not representing Fathom when I say this, but on both NFT and crypto, don't do either. That's all I've got.
Certainly, I've nothing interesting in that apart from I'm seeing it sort of permeate into my daughter's life, who is 7, and she's playing Roblox, and NFTs have already become part of Roblox, and she's trading and doing transactions on virtual T-shirts and stuff like that. It's just it's mind blowing. But yes, is there a bubble there that'll burst? No one will know. And as Gareth alluded to at the start, the predictions of where the web would go and what it wouldn't be able to do and the success it wouldn't achieve, you can't predict the future really. So but a really interesting question, and maybe one in a few years time we'll be better equipped to know the answer to. Another question, quite a broad one here, Gareth, from Divya, has talked about, I guess, like parameters. So she's saying, look, an organization that wants to change and invest in UX, how do they overcome difficulties? So they want to change the user experience, but certain things are holding them back because of technical difficulties or parameters.
I think this gets to the heart of something that we often observe, which is I think there are two things which move us away from our customers. I think the first thing is that as we move along in our careers and we get more senior, we tend to find that we spend more time with colleagues than we do with customers. So that what that can mean is that sometimes the customer's voice isn't as loud as it could or should be. I think the other thing is that as the world becomes more technical and we carry out most of our business technically, that too removes us from our customers. So previously our customers may have come into the shop, may have come into the store, may have come into the office. We're meeting them all the time. So we get a sense from them. We get a sort of constant feedback loop about how we're treating them. And I think the fact that technology aligned with the age and seniority profile of people who are leading technology, I think both of those things mean that we are further removed from our customer or our user than we might be when we're making those design decisions. And I think some of that, when I think about some of the more powerful work that Fathom has done over the years, I think at the heart of it has been bringing the customer's voice into the room, whether that is showing analytics or whether that is showing senior people the outcomes of usability tests or field studies or just interviews with customers on the street. There's something very powerful about, like it reminds me of this slide that I showed a little while ago about the relationship between beliefs and facts. I think at the very heart of what UX is, it is making sure that what decision makers believe and what facts are are the same thing. And very often the job of the UX practitioner, whether that's an agency like us at Fathom or yourself wanting to champion UX internally, one of our big responsibilities is to make sure that whatever decisions the decision makers may take, at least you have managed to align what they believe with what is actually true. So that will be at the heart of how we might think about promoting, developing, maturing UX within an organization.
I was maybe going to add to that briefly around the technical challenges part of the question, in that, you know, when we undertake projects, as I'm sure if you work in UX yourself, Divya, you may undertake this activity as well, but we often try and ensure that we know what those technical parameters are before embarking on particularly the design phase of a project. And, you know, we've talked about it quite a bit in some of our webinars and blogs as well, that the good design happens within parameters, happens within constraints, because it's those constraints that allow you to focus and actually prioritize what can be done and what should be done based on that user insight. If there weren't constraints or technical parameters in many projects, you would maybe overstretch or be over ambitious with your end goals, and very often than not, that's maybe not what users need. So I think look at constraints and technical parameters positively, because they can really make you laser focused on what you can do and should do, as opposed to what, you know, theoretically you'd like to do. So that's maybe just one other thing to add into the mix there.
I think it's a great point.
There's no other questions, unfortunately, Gareth, that have come in.
That's all right.
But we'll keep it open for another 3 minutes or so, because we've got that time. But while we're doing that, I'll maybe just you know, set the scene and just say thanks for everyone turning up today. And you know, we love to hear from you, not just about today's session, but anything at all that's UX related or experience design related. So we'd love to just, you know, you'd love you to keep in touch with us, and we'd be delighted to get back to you. So you can get back, you can subscribe to our newsletter. You simply go to our website and follow the intuitive navigation, hopefully, to get there. And of course, I mentioned at the start, you can follow us and tag us on Twitter, Fathom UX. And if you're interested in today's content, please use the hashtag UXBytes. And we would invite you to read our blog. So we'll push not only today's webinar onto our blog with the video and commentary and Q&A, but we will you'll find loads of blog content there going back, you know, 11 years of our existence. So hopefully you'll find that interesting, and hopefully helps you understand and pursue your UX in a better fashion. And we'll be sending out a survey very soon to everyone who signed up today and attended, just to get your feedback, because we want to keep improving our content and how it connects with you on the webinar. So thanks so much for that. I've just been keeping an eye on questions and nothing else has come in. So I think that's pretty much our time up anyway. So once again, thanks again from myself and Gareth.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And please keep an eye, and we'll get those answers up as soon as we can. Thank you, folks.
Thanks a lot. Bye.